Hi, my name is Kamila and I'm here to talk about the research study Sturgeon Capital has done in the summer of 2022 to analyze the underrepresentation of women in venture in the markets we've invested through our first fund, which are Bangladesh, Egypt, Pakistan, Central Asia, and Georgia. Sturgeon is a for-profit but also a for-impact investor, so we look to invest in teams with exceptional talent and scalable products that are ultimately transforming how the societies of emerging and frontier markets operate. And for that reason, we believe that the impact that's generated through job creation, financial inclusion, and further digital transformation needs to be sustainable and also equitable along gender lines. Despite this belief, only 10% of our own pipeline consists of women-founded or co-founded businesses, and none are represented in the portfolio of the first fund. So through this study, we wanted to build a bottom-up analysis of underlying causes of underrepresentation of women, and create a list of actionable recommendations for ourselves, first and foremost, but also for other VCs and founders to address. So we've done this by using both qualitative and quantitative data collection and analysis. For the quantitative part, we relied on the 2X challenge criteria that came out of the G7 summit in 2018, where various DFIs, IFIs, and private sector players made a commitment to invest into businesses that promote women's participation and empowerment. The initial commitment was set to $3 billion USD. It was surpassed and reached 11 billion, and the goal for this year has been set to 15 billion. So what does investing in women really mean? We thought the 2X criteria covered this quite holistically, calling investors to not only look at the proportion of women founders and co-founders, but also women on boards, in C-suite, the sort of roles they occupy, women's overall employment and equity in the company, companies that build products specifically for women, and lastly, any qualitative policies that are beneficial to attracting and retaining female talent. To create a country-by-country snapshot with these identifiers in mind, we collected primary data through interviews with 83 participants across 7 countries, representing 18 VCs, 8 accelerators, 40 startups, and 2 research groups. Many of them represent local firms and startups, but also bigger regional players and companies operating across several countries. So every participant provided data on women for their company, and also shared their perspectives and examples of challenges women may face in venture. The male founders were asked the same questions as females, and also shared their perspectives on whether they thought any of those challenges differed for women. And once the interviews were summarized, we were able to count how many times a specific challenge was mentioned and created a list of overarching themes as well as country-specific themes. So after reviewing the 2X data, we saw that there are indeed fewer women-founded and co-founded businesses as compared to men-founded. But there are some interesting and positive dynamics to consider. For instance, women's participation in venture generally tracks their overall participation in the labor market. And in some countries like Egypt, where only 15% of the female population is actively employed, our sample actually showed a more encouraging participation in venture at 31%. In addition, in all countries but Pakistan, there were more women co-founded than solely women-founded businesses, and that proportion was the highest in Central Asia and Georgia, with 28% of businesses co-founded by women. That's important to highlight because through our conversations with the founders, we also learned that mixed gender teams just seem to be better equipped in mitigating some of the limitations women face, especially around networking and traveling in these emerging and frontier societies. In addition, Central Asia and Georgia also had the highest participation of women in venture, representing half of the workforce in startups. So in regard to encouraging women's participation, many companies in our sample didn't actually have specific quotas for recruiting women, but they did offer flexibility around work arrangements, parental leave coverage, remote work, transportation support, and even personal well-being and menstrual leave coverage in some companies. In parallel to the 2X findings, the qualitative analysis of interviews gave us 8 overarching and 4 country-specific themes of challenges women face in venture. A lot of them overlap, but we'll go through each one individually. To start with, many founders in the emerging and frontier markets are faced with the lack of exposure and operational know-how of working in the startup ecosystem. The ecosystem of each market is still fairly nascent, and it's hard to get that experience unless one travels, studies, or works abroad. And this was especially true in our sample, since most of the participants actually had experience working or studying abroad, representing mostly the upper middle class populations. That same exposure plays a big role in how founders approach opportunities, because with further digitization of their countries and having potentially seen or experienced what products can be built with technology, many of them got inspired to create something in their home market. Women in this equation are especially vulnerable because many have been historically precluded from traveling, being educated abroad, or enter certain fields like finance or logistics. Today, more women can be found in big corporates across junior and mid-level roles, but there's still fewer at the top managing operations of big teams, especially in the emerging markets. Which takes us to the next theme, and that's lack of trust women experience with investors and even their own colleagues and employees. Often their authority and leadership abilities are questioned in subtle and sometimes very apparent ways. We've heard examples where women were asked if they're really the CEO or the COO, if they have a powerful man behind them. One male founder said his female employees sometimes have to ask him to follow up on emails to ensure they get responses. And often when women deliver constructive feedback to employees, both male and female, they get pushback, where the same feedback by their male counterpart is taken seriously, which was especially apparent in interviews with mixed co-founding teams. The traditional role of women in emerging market societies and the corresponding need for stability is another theme that we uncovered. The role women have in more conservative societies, again, often dictates prioritization of family applications. More importantly, many women truly embrace their role as a mother and a wife, but for that reason, going into venture becomes a much bigger leap of faith for them psychologically. They often feel lack of support and encouragement to go into venture by their family members. Not having that support is detrimental, especially during the bootstrapping phase, where founders often tapped into their networks to raise funds. Even in places where women represent more STEM graduates than men, like Egypt, they often go into academia instead of joining startups because it's a more stable environment with set working hours and minimum leave coverage. Which kind of leads us to the next point, and that is the women also tend to be overrepresented as founders and co-founders in health tech, ed tech, femtech, and beauty and fashion startups. And there are fewer women in fintech, logistics, and B2B startups. This could also go back to exposure and expectations around more acceptable professions. In addition, women tend to be very purpose and impact driven, especially when working in education and healthcare. This could be perceived as being more focused on impact and less so on commercial success. So often we've heard their businesses are perceived as NGOs or nonprofits, even if they have successful revenue generating startups. In addition to this perception issue, a lot of VCs we've interviewed like to invest in fintech and B2B solutions, including Sturgeon. So edtech and femtech, where women are potentially represented in higher proportions, may also be getting less attention from some investors. Another theme is that more women seem to be represented across specific roles in HR, marketing, legal and support, and fewer in purely technical roles like programming and coding. This was true even for women-founded companies with a more activist approach to recruiting female tech talent. Even though we had women CEOs, CFOs, COOs in our sample, if a woman was the COO, often the feet on the ground would be men, especially in the space of physical collections, recovery, logistics, or shipping. Fewer women in venture also translates to fewer female role models, which is the next theme. It's often been mentioned by women how important it was to see that they weren't the only woman in the room. Some industries seem to be completely dominated by men, and ultimately, not many women want to join companies where they're the only woman on the team. It's been said by many founders that having representation of women across venture, be it on the investor or the founder side, has a positive effect because it encourages more women to join and feel like they have a place in this industry too. One of the co-founders in Pakistan actually mentioned this quote she heard somewhere else, which is that once you get to the top floor, it's important to send the elevator back down. So she's been very active in mentoring the up-and-coming female talent to join the industry. The next theme is that many women experience an imposter syndrome, which is expressed through added pressure to perform and lead, but also juggle their family responsibilities with career aspirations. Again, one of the quotes that stand out from our research was by a woman co-founder in Bangladesh who said that coming from this part of the world, you're taught that you're entitled to nothing and have to be thankful for everything from a very early age. So she always felt more pressure on her shoulders to deliver results, which her male co-founders, although extremely supportive of her and driven to grow their business, didn't always share that pressure to the same extent. The last overarching theme is that investors tend to index founders on the more male-oriented persona that is vocal and aggressive. It's been mentioned many times that women come with more conservative projections and are more collaborative in their communication approach, which is different to how men pitch and present in the frontier markets. So when it comes to the country-specific themes, women in Bangladesh and Pakistan reported that there are mobility and safety concerns women have when traveling. In places like Dhaka or Karachi, women often have to travel for hours to get to work, and they report harassment or feeling unsafe in public spaces. There's also an interesting doctor bride and teacher bride phenomenon in Central Asia and Pakistan, where it was stated that many women get university degrees in these fields and either decide to never enter the workforce or work until they get married or have kids. So having a university degree increases their chances of getting married. There's also a lack of constructive feedback in Bangladesh, where investors don't want to offend women. And in places like Pakistan, it goes a bit further, where many women reported not even getting a chance to speak to an investor because they were explicitly told that they don't invest in women-founded businesses. Lastly, there's a shortage of daycare centers in Pakistan, where the responsibility to raise children rests on the woman and the family. So working mothers often struggle with finding somewhere to leave their children while they work. We had an example of a woman who said she used to travel 2 hours each way to leave her child with her parents while she worked as a doctor. So she now has a health tech startup with a daycare center on site for all the working mothers and fathers at her company, because she experienced firsthand how difficult it was to find one. Now let's talk through the list of actionable recommendations we're proposing to address these challenges. So to tackle the lack of exposure, sector, and role concentration, we think offering internships or externships in the portfolio companies can be helpful in expanding the depth of experience of future founders, especially females. Whether it's incorporated on the side of the VC itself, through an internal program, or via partnerships with local universities and accelerators, this will gradually increase the pipeline of talent with hands-on experience in the startup ecosystem. To address the imposter syndrome, sector and role concentration, as well as lack of constructive feedback, we propose to offer mentorship to founders. Again, VCs can either run internal mentorship programs or sign up to become a mentor with an existing player like an accelerator. This will allow investors to meet diverse talent and guide them through the process of development, and also influence how inclusive the ecosystem can grow to be. We also think that incorporating gender parity and diversity questions into the due diligence process from the start can help tackle challenges related to the need for stability, lack of trust, mobility, and safety concerns. This would give investors an opportunity to discuss the importance of diversity as a way to create stronger teams that can mitigate risks more effectively. And as part of this recommendation, we think startups can be guided through the process of identifying specific KPIs and creating action plans if the teams are initially more homogeneous in their gender composition. In order to further address the issue of lack of role models, imposter syndrome, the need for stability, and daycare shortages, we propose to establish a list of best practices and policies that would be instrumental in attracting and retaining diverse slate of talent. So everything we mentioned before, from parental leave coverage, daycare coverage, flexible work arrangements, transportation support, all of these best practices should be considered by startups to add to the benefits package where they can, and all the job postings should have an equal opportunity and gender neutral language. We also think creating marketing campaigns that would highlight diverse talent can help with the issue of lack of role models, which was mentioned almost uniformly across all conversations. So VCs can work with startups in their portfolio to encourage creation of campaigns on their website or LinkedIn, and to spotlight diverse employees and customers who may be underrepresented. Some startups we spoke to have already done this, and they've seen an increase in participation from these groups. Finally, we think to meaningfully address the indexing on male persona, it's important for investors to be cognizant of the differences in the communication styles between men and women, especially in the frontier markets. These differences are probably completely dictated by the underlying norms of behavior for each gender. And being effective doesn't always equal to being aggressive and vice versa. So focusing on the realistic opportunity at hand is more important, especially if the business is scaling and growing in revenues. So we believe that implementing these recommendations can help move the needle on this issue of underrepresentation of women in venture. And we certainly hope to play our part in it. So if you're interested to learn more or read the full report, go on our website or feel free to reach out directly. Thank you for your time.